pressure looks good.
Doubling up. Roger, roll, Atlantic.
Water towers can fly! Yes!
Tango Delta nominal.
Flight down, speed off. Bring in, speed off. Off.
Yikes. You bet. Okay. We don't need any more of these.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jack Beyer with NASASpaceflight, and we are gearing up for a Atlas V launch tonight. We have a whole bunch of people in the field as usual, so let's go through them. Oh gosh, Michael asked me to do it alphabetically, so now I have to figure things out. Julia! We've got Julia out there. Hey, Julia.
Hello, Jack.
I guess I went with last names. So okay, Chris. What's up, Chris?
Hi, Jack. How's it going? It's math and alphabetizing this morning as we wait for the Atlas on STP-3. Yes.
Sure enough. And we've also got out in the field, Thomas.
Hey, Jack. How you doing?
No complaints. Oh my God!
Are we fumbling the alphabetical order right now?
I'm completely fumbling the alphabetical order. You said Discord. Okay.
Anyway, welcome everybody to NASA Spaceflight's coverage of the STP-3 mission, and we're all here joining you from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. You are looking live at Pad 41, where Atlas V is almost fully fueled. You can see it venting already. Of course, Atlas V has a nice long countdown, and we're coming up on launch at 4:04 a.m. Eastern Time, which is just about 42 minutes from now. We'll be bringing you live coverage of today's launch from Cape Canaveral.
And I'm seeing 5x5s in chat, so they have good audio. And don't forget, if you have any questions, at NASA Spaceflight, and we will see your questions pop up in some nifty software Michael wrote. Yep.
Indeed, because it's an interesting mission, is it not, Thomas?
It is. There's actually a couple interesting things. This is a mission for the U.S. Space Force with 2 spacecraft on board. The primary payload is STP-3, and STP, that acronym we keep throwing around, is the Space Test Program, one of the divisions of the U.S. Space Force. And basically it's the part of the Space Force that does technology demonstrations, experimental payloads, things like that. A lot of times it's missions that aren't completely classified. In fact, there are some unclassified payloads on board today's launch as well. But there's also a lot of DoD stuff that we won't really be able to talk about because we don't know that much. But one payload on board the STP-3 spacecraft is actually a laser communications demonstration for NASA. So NASA actually has a civilian payload on board. And then in addition to that spacecraft, which also carries some DoD payloads, there is the secondary payload, which is actually an ESPA ring, like kind of a rideshare ring that you would have seen on lots of rideshare missions in the past. That is also hosting a bunch of Department of Defense missions on board. And those 2 spacecraft are going to be deployed directly into geostationary orbit, not a geostationary transfer orbit, which is much more common, but Centaur, the upper stage of Atlas V, is going to take those spacecraft all the way to geostationary orbit and actually circularize that orbit. That mission profile is going to take several hours. Of course, we'll just be covering the initial phase of flight today, and then there'll be further updates on ULA's social media and things like that. But we are here for the initial liftoff, which will first take these payloads and the Centaur upper stage into a parking orbit, just a low Earth orbit, parking orbit. Then after a brief coast, the Centaur upper stage will do a transfer burn, which would reach a geostationary transfer orbit, where a lot of geostationary missions end their initial ascent, and then the spacecraft do the rest. But today, Centaur will be doing that final step of circularizing the orbit several hours afterward. And in doing this mission profile, Chris, there is also a couple new technologies and things that ULA is demonstrating on their own vehicle.
Yes, that is correct. So just like you said, because this is going directly to to the geo belt and everything with the Atlas, there's some things that they need to do with the Centaur to make sure that it is still operational for the big 7.5-hour long mission. So in addition to some battery upgrades that the Centaur has, there are also some new power augmentation upgrades to the Centaur upper stage that allow the satellite passengers to remain fully charged throughout the entire coast up to their circularized geolocation. And normally in geostationary transfer orbit missions, where the satellites would be deployed roughly 35-ish minutes before launch or after liftoff or something like that, they would deploy their solar panels and they would become power positive on their own, but they can't be deploying their solar panels when the Centaur upper stage is still going to be doing firings and everything to circularize the orbit and change the inclination and everything like that. So we do have some increased power augmentation capabilities on the Centaur as well. But the most visual change that you will be able to see is on the outside of the rocket. And while the Atlas doesn't look any different, it's still an Atlas 5.1 configuration with a 5-meter diameter payload fairing. The payload fairing is very different. So this one was not manufactured by RUAG over in Switzerland. This one was actually manufactured in the Decatur, Alabama production facility right next door to the factories where the Atlases are actually produced. And it was still RUAG Space that made the fairing, but the new fairing uses a new manufacturing method called out of autoclave. And this replaces the fairings that I mentioned that were made in Switzerland. Same diameter size, but the mass is less and the cost is less. So a better way of making the Atlas slightly more efficient in that regard. So yeah, a really intriguing test mission all around. And it is also worth noting that these solid rocket motors on board the Atlas tonight are not the Aerojet AJ-60As, but they are the Northrop Grumman GEM 63 solid rocket motors for the Atlas today. So lots of testing on this one.
Yeah, and of course, seeing as it is a 5.5.1 configuration, there are 5 of those boosters strapped to the Atlas V first stage, which means that we are in for a nice loud launch today. Of course, here on the Space Coast, we're looking at a 4 a.m. liftoff, which is very early morning for us. We've also got our friends Jack and Michael over in the Pacific time zone who have stayed up late for tonight's launch. So wherever you are watching from, I hope it's a more civilized hour for you guys, but we're happy to bring today's launch despite the very early morning start today.
Sure enough. I mean, hey, I'll take staying up till 12 versus getting up at 3. Or for that matter, staying up till 3. We've got a super chat that came in. Thank you, JR, for the support. They say have some coffee and morning from Maryland. And we've got some questions coming in. If you guys feel like going through some of those, or if you want to keep discussing the mission, go for it.
I think we're ready for some questions.
I agree.
Cool. Travis is asking, the boosters are not symmetric all around the main stage, right? And if so, why are they not symmetric?
So that is correct. So partly this comes from how they are mounted onto the Atlas vehicle based on the pad infrastructure. And all of that sort of stems from the fact that the Atlas V core stage with the RD-180's main engine has a really good thrust vector control system, meaning it can gimbal in a way that can correct for thrust offset. So the rocket will still fly straight and true as it normally does and as we would expect it to do, but it's that RD-180 engine that is correcting for the thrust imbalance because one side of the Atlas has 2 solid rocket motors and the other side has the 3 to get us to the 5.
And of course, this is one of the less obvious examples of that because when you strap all 5 to the side, it is more or less symmetric. It's not exactly symmetric, but it's pretty close.
It looks closer, yeah.
Yeah, but you could certainly find some different Atlas V missions that had one solid booster just strapped to the side, which anyone looking at that goes, well, there's no way that can possibly work. But the RD-180 can gimbal that much that even that much of an offset is actually doable. But yeah, the reason that those boosters have to be mounted non-symmetrically, I believe, is from the piping that goes down the side of the first stage to connect the upper and lower tanks to the engine section. There's a part of that Atlas V first stage that kind of juts out a bit, and you can't mount a booster there, so it's kind of a byproduct of that. Going forward, of course, with the Vulcan rocket, which of course the fairings on board today's flight are partly being tested for future use on the Vulcan rocket. That first stage does not have that plumbing configuration, and so we will see these GEM 63 XLs, which are just stretched versions of these boosters, to be used on Vulcan. They'll be mounted symmetrically, and we'll have a kind of a more normal, per se, looking rocket when ULA transitions to their next-gen launch vehicle.
I can't wait for Vulcan. I'm so excited. Let's see. Going through some more questions. And don't forget, you can ask a question. You don't have to super chat or anything. Just at NASASpaceflight before your question. Let's see. Tony is asking, how does the Atlas V numbering work? It stands to reason that it relates to the number of strap-on solids, so 551 equals 5 solids. One of those is related to fairing diameter, right?
Yeah, the first digit is the fairing diameter. We're with a 5-meter class fairing today. The other option would be a 4-meter class fairing, which is, if you've seen an Atlas V with kind of a more pointy fairing and nose cone up top, that would be the 4-meter fairing. The Lucy mission had the 4-meter class fairing. And then that second digit is the number of boosters, which can be anywhere from 0 to 5. And then that final digit is either a 1 or a 2. It is almost always a 1. And in this case, it's the number of engines on the Centaur upper stage, those RL-10 engines. But very rarely, when we have a Starliner mission, there will be 2 of those RL-10s on that upper stage. It's just part of the Atlas V configuration they use for those missions. But other than Starliner missions, almost all Atlas V missions, in fact, I think all Atlas V missions have used single-engine Centaurs. Not that the double-engine Centaur hasn't flown before, just not on Atlas V outside of Starliner missions.
Indeed, and I think the other thing to mention, just that's a nice coincidence tonight with numbering schemes, is tonight is the 90th flight of the Atlas V rocket. So, nice round number for the Atlas tonight.
Yes, also United Launch Alliance's 5th mission of the year, and the last one of the year for ULA's 2021 launch campaign.
Yes, indeed.
Very cool. And I'm hearing we are tracking, or they are tracking, no issues at this time. So looks like we are proceeding very, onward into the count, and with just about 31 minutes to go.
Yeah, we do have a 2-hour launch window today. So if any of the ULA teams spot anything that requires some extra attention, there is approximately 2 hours after the 404 T0, should that be needed. But like Jack just mentioned, we're all on track, and to be honest, all of us here at the press site would really like to just go with the opening of the window if that'll work out. So, but we're not seeing anything here, outside the technical issues. The other item that we always watch for when determining if a launch will go off is the weather. And happy to report that the skies are clear above the Space Coast here. Lots of stars visible, other than those blocked by the bright xenon lights out at the pad. So it looks like a beautiful morning/night, depending on your perspective, to go to space. A little windy here on the ground, but nothing too crazy and nothing that we would be concerned about for a launch.
So I actually have a question, if I'm allowed to ask a question.
Oh,
yes,
I don't
actually,
know. That's crazy. No, I'm kidding.
All right. My question's for Julia. So obviously we're not recovering anything on the Atlas today because it's an expendable rocket, but we do have a booster sitting out waiting to come into Port Canaveral. How does booster returns work when you have an exclusion zone near the Cape?
Well, when there's an exclusion zone near the Cape, cruise ships, cargo ships, pleasure boats, and recovery ships actually need to also heed that zone. So they'll have a beautiful view, but they are, without pulling up tracking, I do know they have to keep that in mind, and they have to be just on the edge of it. So they'll probably be to the south side, closer to where they would enter in the channel for in the morning.
Let's see. Mars Embassy, thanks for the support. They say thanks for the great coverage. Thanks, buddy. And Magic Skates is saying, if the fourth quarter this year is this active with so many different companies, any predictions on what next year will be like? Big support from Canada. Thank you for the support, Magic Skates.
Oh, man. There is a whole lot coming next year, potentially. We're actually due for a pretty busy end of the year still, even with this mission. This is the second launch from the Space Coast in December after a Falcon 9 earlier in the month. And, of course, there's a second Falcon 9 later this week, Thursday morning, with the Imaging X-ray Polarimetry Explorer for NASA. And then 2 additional Falcon 9s scheduled at the very least, including the Turksat 5B ComSat and the CRS-24 cargo mission to the International Space Station. But other than that, of course, Starlinks can also appear, but that should do it for the end of 2021's launch campaign. And then we move into next year where We have things like Big Orange rockets, the Space Launch System's Artemis 1 debut. Also, some things like some new small set launchers that are going to fly again. Astra's next launch is no earlier than January, also here from Cape Canaveral. More Falcon 9s, obviously, a lot of Falcon Heavy missions as well. Chris, what else should I be bringing up about stuff coming up next year?
Well, I think the biggest question in terms of the cadence out of here is going to be just how quickly SpaceX is ready to start salvoing off the next rounds of Starlink satellites. We saw a very busy first half of the year where the Falcons did about 22 flights or something like that in the first 25 or so weeks of the year, and then really hit a lull after that as they were transitioning to the different versions of the satellite. So I think a lot for what we're looking forward to here from the Cape will just have to will largely center around what SpaceX's cadence out of here ends up being. And you know, like you said, I mean, like we should see some new things. Hopefully, Vulcan next year too, if the BE-4 engines can arrive in enough time to support it.
Where are those engines, Jeff? Let's see. Got some more questions. Niche is asking, can you explain what the ground support equipment related delay was, how it was fixed, and slightly more irrelevant question, is the Atlas fuel farm under or above ground? I think it's above ground, right?
It is above ground, yes. So they were leaking RP1 kerosene out of ground support equipment and piping on as they headed into their first launch attempt. So they needed to stop and fix that leak so that you were not leaking RP1. Our RP1 kerosene itself is very stable. If you just put it on the ground, it will not spontaneously ignite. It doesn't require like an ignition source. But once you give it an ignition source, like, I don't know, 5 solid rocket motors shooting out flaming chunks of debris, you don't really want a path back to your tank. So they had to stop to fix the ground leak of kerosene. And then after they fixed it, they needed to verify that the fuel mixture was still correct, so that if they needed to detank and retank for whatever reason, they weren't going to accidentally contaminate anything or use propellant that wasn't correct. So that was the reason for the 2 days of delays.
Very cool. Thank you for the comprehensive answer, as usual, Chris.
Another item worth mentioning that is a bit special to Atlas V is this RP1 kerosene was loaded pretty much as soon as the rocket rolled out to the pad, which is a couple days before launch. And that's because, unlike the Falcon 9, for example, which uses the same propellant, Falcon 9 uses super chilled RP1 kerosene. They densify it by making it really cold, which ULA does not do on Atlas V. So the RP1 can be loaded days ahead of time and just sits in the rocket's tanks, and it knows no different. Partially an advantage. Also, it helps for missions where there is a wet dress rehearsal, because sometimes they'll load up the whole rocket during the wet dress rehearsal, and then they'll just detank the hydrogen and oxygen from Centaur and the liquid oxygen from the upper stage, because all of those have to be kept very, very cold to stay liquid. But they'll leave the RP1 kerosene in, which actually lowers the center of mass of the rocket, which makes it easier and safer to roll it back to the VIF, the VIF, or the Vertical Integration Facility, for them to put the payload on top and roll back out for launch. So no wet dress rehearsal for this particular mission, but either way, the RP1 was loaded well in advance, and then the rest of the rocket's propellants, the liquid oxygen on both stages, and then the liquid hydrogen on the Centaur upper stage, were loaded much closer to liftoff during tonight's countdown.
Yeah, good to note. Speaking of the hydrogen, that flare you see to the left of the leftmost lightning tower, which is what those 4 white towers are, just to get that out of the way, that flare that you see is a hydrogen flare, and it might get much larger, like we saw with, what was that mission, Lucy, Chris?
Yeah.
It was, yeah. During the Lucy mission, right before we went live, about an hour before launch, the hydrogen flare stack just like shot flames 100 feet into the air. It's pretty impressive.
I know we all love some good flare stack action, so just wanted to point that out for our viewers at home.
When flare stack shirt?
Oh man, that's a really good question. Somebody type that in the store Discord channel. Let's see. Ketchi Yuri 22 asking, will this be visible from Fleet Cam? Boy, will it ever.
Oh,
if you don't know
yeah.
what, if you don't know what Fleet Cam is, it is a 24/7 camera we have installed there in the port of Canaveral. So go and check that out when you get a chance, and we'll
Michael
definitely
showed it on screen, so he
we'll
caught the
definitely
hint.
nice. We'll definitely be using some views from that if it looks good. It's one of the arrows in our quiver, so to say.
Yeah, and as far as kind of addressing the launch visibility overall, this mission, since it is going to geostationary orbit, will be flying due east from Cape Canaveral. It's not one of those missions that flies up the coast of the United States, so if you're used to having missions visible from the Carolinas and kind of farther up the northeast United States, that is unfortunately not the case for today's mission. This mission is going due east, right out over the ocean. And so visibility is going to be pretty limited to Florida for this particular launch. But if you are in Florida and the skies are clear where you are as well, do head and look out east if you are awake at this hour, because Atlas V will be pretty bright going up this morning.
And as well, Bahamas and some of the northern Caribbean islands. If you happen to be watching from there, you might get quite a show. Probably, because I know we're going to get this question, probably a little too early in the morning here in Florida for the jellyfish effect of the Atlas V. But the further downrange you are in some of the Caribbean islands, the closer to morning you are and sunrise. So you might get some interesting effects if you're in the Caribbean.
And you know what, Chris? Fun fact, if you are not up and you live on the Space Coast, you will probably wake up when this one launches.
That is a very good
yes.
point. Yes, ULA unofficially, or I don't know if ULA unofficially calls it, Tory Bruno unofficially calls this particular Atlas configuration the Bruiser. It is the heaviest Atlas V configuration, 5 solid strapped to the sides.
I love those names. Each of the different Atlas configs has kind of a jokey or like unofficial name or nickname, whatever you want to call it. I think what is the no SRB one? I think that one's Slick Atlas.
Yeah, Slick Atlas.
That's the only one I remember.
I had to look it up because I wanted to post a picture from remote camera setup, and I forgot which nickname the 551 was, so I had to find the Tory Bruno tweet. There was a Tory Bruno tweet that has all the nicknames of all the different Atlas configurations.
Let's see here. Here's one. P.A. Nilsson is asking, how many Atlas left until end of life?
Oh, a fair amount still, although ULA does say that they have sold their last Atlas. So all of the Atlases that are left have been sold to launch customers. But I don't think we have the exact number.
20 something sticks in my mind.
It's somewhere in that ballpark, yeah.
Yeah, 26 is the number that sticks in my mind, but take that with a grain of salt on either side, a couple of flights. Yeah.
It was very close to right after they announced that contract with Amazon for the Project Kuiper constellation, which I believe contracted 9 Atlas V launches. And shortly after that, they announced they had sold their last. I don't know if that means that Amazon took the last 9 Atlases, or it took almost all of the last Atlases and then they sold one more or something. But between Kuiper, some national security missions, the rest of the initial Starliner flights, all of those customers, that has rounded out the end of Atlas V's manifest, and ULA has transitioned all new launch service sales to the Vulcan launch vehicle.
Yes, I know which one it was that got them to the final one. It was one of the awards for the National Security Space Launch missions. They had to switch from Vulcan to Atlas because Vulcan wasn't ready. Yep.
Gotcha.
And
So
I do recall Tori even saying that, no, when I say the last one, I mean the last one, not one that can maybe be put on display, that they were sold out.
Yeah. Unlike the Delta II, where they had the extra one, which we now proudly display at the Kennedy Space Center, no Atlases that are going to go on display, which is a little unfortunate, but also good to see them actually flying too.
Yeah, it's kind of like what's better, it being on display in a rocket garden for people to look at, which, can inspire people and is cool, or it being used to launch payload.
Right.
Kind of like a rocket is Is it living if it's not launching payload? It's its life. It's its whole goal.
Yeah.
Let's see. Some more questions from our viewers. Don't forget, at NASASpaceflight in chat, and we'll be able to see your question pop up. Ashley is asking, why does a 5-meter fairing extend all the way down, covering the Centaur stage?
Yeah, so this largely has to do with the aerodynamics of the rocket, and when you bump out from 4 meters to technically 5.5 meters is the diameter of the fairing for the Atlas 551 configuration. It changes the overall aerodynamic characteristics of the rocket downstream, so the fairing has to be slightly bigger to provide for a stable slipstream environment as the rocket heads uphill.
Very cool.
Another byproduct that we'll probably hear a little later during the rocket's ascent is there's an extra piece of hardware called a CFLR deck, which stands for cross something load something. I don't know. Someone's got to look up the acronym for me, but it is basically a structural piece that attaches the top of the Centaur upper stage to the fairing and helps just transfer some structural loads throughout the rocket better, since the fairing is encompassing the entire upper stage as well. And once the fairing separates shortly after that, that deck also gets jettisoned from the side of Centaur. So there's actually 2 separation events kind of going on there.
And
so
if the yeah, and sorry, if the and if the cameras are on the Centaur upper stage, we sometimes do get to see that piece of equipment separate, just a couple seconds after the payload fairings. Yeah.
I'm frantically trying to figure out what that acronym was for you, but I'm coming up blank here. Maybe somebody in chat will let us know. Let's see. Looking for some more questions. Real quick, Wade, thank you so much for the support. They say Atlas 411 slider is best Atlas. I mean, we could debate all night which is best Atlas, but thank you for the support either way.
I have found the acronym CFLR. It is the Centaur Forward Load Reactor Deck.
Good. I'm glad you succeeded where I failed.
And for the person who just said that they love the 411, there is a 511 that will be coming up here as well. One of their delayed missions that will actually have a single solid rocket motor and a 5-meter diameter payload fairing. And it's the first time that particular configuration of the Atlas will fly.
That one's going to look awesome. I love the 5-meter fairing in particular. Like any of the 5 series Atlases, I think are best Atlas. But what were you going to say, Thomas?
I just off the top of my head, I believe that is actually the next Atlas after this one.
I think so.
The manifest has shifted a couple times, so if that has changed, then my bad. But I'm pretty sure that is actually the next Atlas that should probably go, maybe even January of next year, January or February, early next year.
Is it that one, or is it GOES that's next?
I think GOES has a little bit longer to go first.
Okay. GOES is early next year as well, yeah.
And that'll be GOES T, which will be followed by GOES U, which will be the first GOES in a very long time to not launch on an Atlas V, because after GOES T, GOES U goes on a Falcon Heavy. But NOAA's GOES constellation getting a bolster next year as well.
Yeah.
Really quick, we are getting close to launch. We're under 15 minutes now. You're looking at Slick 41 in Cape Canaveral. It's an Atlas 551 launching STP-3, which is 2 experimental satellites for the United States Space Force. Why don't we go around and just reintroduce everybody really quick, since I botched it so hard at the beginning. Plus, we might have some new viewers that tuned in since that horrible debacle.
Hey, really quick, before we go into the intro, we do have an update. There are currently no-go for upper-level winds, and the planned hold that they are in right now is being extended. No new T0 at this time.
Copy that. All right, well, let's try this again. Chris, we've got Chris G out there in the field, Assistant Managing Editor of NASASpaceflight.
Hello, everyone, as we push into our 2-hour-long launch window here for STP-3. Good morning, good evening, good whatever time it is where you are in the world.
Yeah, thankfully there is that 2-hour window. It's not an instantaneous window, so you're saying there's a chance.
Saying there's a chance.
And then next up, also out there in the field today, we've got Julia Bergeron. Am I saying your last name right, Julia?
Well, yes, you are. It is Bergeron, somewhat French, a lot like the game show host, actually.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, my name is somewhat German, so, there you go. But thank you for rolling out there so early in the morning, Julia.
Happy to be here.
And also out in the field, we've got Thomas. What's up, Thomas?
Hey, Jack. Thomas Burkhardt, news director at NASASpaceflight, rounding out the crew here on commentary. We also should just give a shout out. He's not on the commentary live stream for us, but Stephen Marr is also out here with his photography skills. So he is also with the NSF team for STP-3.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to Steven's photos and Julia's photos and everybody's content from this launch. And I am Jack Beyer, the voice you are hearing now, video editor, photographer, live stream host, whatever you want to call me, with NASA Spaceflight. But you don't care about me. Let's talk about Atlas.
Well, actually, two quick things, Jack, really quick. I just want to also shout out Michael Baylor in the background, who is making all of this possible, pulling all the levers and pushing all the buttons that we need to bring you the broadcast, and also a special yeah, well, I kind of started to say his name there. It's early, forgive me.
Guys. Give him a break.
Also, we want to give a special shout out to our other NASA Spaceflight team member, Gavin, who has made the trek from the United Kingdom and is here in Florida, and this will be his first launch. So, wherever you're watching from, Gavin, hope you are going to enjoy this today. Followed by a booster return, so he's going to have a fun day.
Yeah,
we do also have... I'm sorry, go ahead, Jack.
No, I'm hoping Gavin gets to see his launch. Go ahead.
Absolutely. And maybe even another one later this week. But we do have just a little bit of extra info from a ULA tweet that just specified that they're actually just waiting for more upper-level winds data. So not necessarily that they went red, but just that they might be verifying. They didn't really specify either way, but they expect the tweet just said that they are extending the hold at least a few minutes. So this could be a very brief extension to the hold.
That to me might indicate that maybe the last round of weather data that they got from the balloons, they were close enough to their limit that they just want to verify to make absolutely sure. Yeah.
Not only there's actually two different ways that you need to look at that data as it's coming in, especially for weather data. Not only is it currently within boundaries, but it also has to be trending in the right direction. If you're somewhere close to the boundary and it was trending towards the boundary, so trending towards values that would make you no-go, that is actually in and of itself a no-go condition because you can't guarantee they will be go when you hit T0. So that's what they might be looking at, and hopefully we'll get an update very, very soon with some new data that says, all right, good to proceed.
And I know some of you are probably going like, but I looked at the weather forecast and it didn't say anything about upper-level winds. And you are correct, because upper-level winds are not factored into the launch percentage forecast that you see. So when you saw from the 45th Space Wing here that it was a... So 10:03 UTC is the new launch time, so that would be 5:03 a.m. Eastern time, so a 59-minute push to the launch time. So launch time now 10:03 UTC or 5:03 a.m. Eastern time here in Florida. So a 59-minute push to our launch. So that would leave about an hour and a minute left in the window for today. So that is our new T0 time, 10:03 UTC, 5:03 a.m. Eastern time. So that is what we are now tracking for the launch of the STP-3 mission on the Atlas V. And as we were mentioning a bit earlier, the 90th voyage of the Atlas V rocket today. The Atlas is flying in its 551 configuration with a 5.5 meter diameter payload fairing, 5 side-mounted solid rocket motors from Northrop Grumman, and a single-engine Centaur upper stage. And what's interesting here, and let's talk about the solid rocket motors for a minute, because the Atlases have flown, the Atlas vehicles that have flown with solid rocket motors since the very first Atlas flight in the early 2000s, or rather the very first Atlas V flight in the early 2000s, have primarily been from Aerojet Rocketdyne, the AJ-60As. But with the Vulcan rocket, ULA is switching the provider for the solid rocket motors from Aerojet Rocketdyne over to Northrop Grumman, and Northrop Grumman will be providing the GEM 63XL solid rocket motors for the Vulcan vehicle. So they also have the GEM 63 regular variants of those boosters, and ULA is in the process of switching over the supplier for the solid rocket motors of the Atlas as well. So some of the Atlas flights will still fly with AJ-60As, like the Starliner crew flights, and then some of the other ones will be transitioning and flying with the Northrop Grumman boosters. And the eventual goal, it was supposed to happen last year, but because the Atlas flight rate never materialized, because a lot of the payloads were not ready from the Space Force for the Atlas missions that were scheduled for this year, that full transition is expected to happen in 2022. Now, it's completely over to the Northrop Grumman GEM 63s. And GEM is GEM, and it stands for Graphite Epoxy Motor.
Oh, darn it, Chris! You're so informative. I literally,
I knew you were going to ask me that. So
I Googled it because I wanted to sound smart, and I was like, cool, I get to say it's a graphite epoxy motor. And no, you beat me to it. So, but very cool. It's all about getting flight heritage on various hardware for Vulcan, so that it builds confidence in Vulcan, right?
And that is exactly it. Yep, this is all about getting the ULA teams and the Northrop teams used to working together, getting some flight experience on the GEM 63 XLs, on the GEM 63s before the GEM 63 XLs power the Vulcan. And one of the interesting things, because I was kind of fascinated by this, because the Northrop solids use a different propellant than the AJ-60As. So I was very curious about this and talking with ULA and Northrop about the changeover and basically how they had to take an existing system and design a rocket motor to fit it. And their answer was that that's actually really easy to do because they had all the specifications they needed for what the Atlas could handle. So it was very easy to just tailor the construction of them to the Atlas so that you really didn't have to do massive redesigns of analysis cycles and performance cycles and what is the vehicle going to be doing at certain portions of flight. Yes, there are some minor and subtle differences when you change like that, but overall, not that much.
Very cool.
Yeah, and that other piece that is being tested today, of course, is those fairings, which the GEM 63s have actually flown before. But this is the first flight of the new out-of-autoclave fairings. And Julia, I know you found those really, really interesting. Do you want to talk about that?
Why, sure, Thomas. So yeah, as we said, flying heritage hardware is a big part of Vulcan. And as these fly on Atlas, they'll be working towards their qualification. I'm not sure if I remember Chris saying or not, but the other neat thing about these I can't even say it. So the fairings that are in front of us that we see right now, guess what? Those do not get manufactured in pieces. They actually are manufactured as a complete half of a fairing. And that was due to the size of the oven that they process them in. So kind of cool. It's also cost effective because this factory that ROG is using is indeed right next door to the Decatur factory. So kind of an integration and partnership there. And I can say it. It is out of autoclave. See, it is
There
early
you
in the
go.
morning.
You did it.
I know the words. I got it.
Out of autoclave. Autoclave is basically just a fancy word for oven, right?
Yes, a very big oven that could probably make a lot of cookies all at once.
See, so you're telling me it's a bucket list item to make cookies in an autoclave. That's what I'm hearing.
Absolutely. Tori, if you heard that, I'd like to meet that oven and make some cookies with you.
Yeah, and like anything, you have to characterize the oven, right? So you're gonna have to make it like several. It's not just one batch of cookies. It's gonna be several. It's so.
Absolutely.
Let's see.
Brownies too. I mean, we do want to test it fully.
Test as you eat. Let's see. Here's a question. It took almost no time for it to pop up after the launch time was moved. Tony is asking, will the new T0 allow the jellyfish effect?
I do not think so. What's our sunrise time here? Let me do a quick check.
Yeah, well,
This is
Thomas
a-
is looking for that. The
This is a
jellyfish
very
is.
popular question.
Yeah,
So
so I'll. Go ahead,
Our,
Thomas.
our sunrise time here is 7:02 a.m. Eastern time. So 5:03 is going to be 2 hours ahead of that. That is too early for a jellyfish effect still.
Too
So,
early, because I can say like 6 a.m. is still kind of pushing darkness
Yeah,
around here
it
right
needs to
now.
be. Yeah, it needs to be well less than an hour before sunrise.
Yep. I mean, I'm sorry, Gav. I know you're out there for a launch, but if you get to see a jellyfish effect for your first launch, I mean, I might just have to fight you. That's too easy. That's too easy. Some of us waited years to see that. Years, I say.
I can say he does have a good launch viewing location, though. So
Excellent.
I do believe where he is, he should be able to feel the solids.
Very cool. Magic Skates, thank you for the support. They say pressure oven cooker, please. That's probably in relation to the cookie bit we were doing earlier. Thank you for the support, Magic
Well,
Skates.
we don't do easy bake ovens, and I'm not sure how a pressure cooker works with cookies. That might be a little gross. Maybe an air fryer.
I'll tell you how it works. It works messily. Let's see what else we got here. Don't forget, I know I keep saying it, but I mean, just throw some questions in chat at NASASpaceflight, and we'll be able to answer them for you. We've got an extra hour now ahead of launch, coming up on an hour and a minute as I talk. So feel free, ask your questions, fire them away. Let's see, and if there's anything that is,
especially if you've got questions about ULA, especially if you have questions about ULA in general, like not just an Atlas or heck, even the Atlas, the Vulcan, the Delta, anything. Yep.
I promise you guys that Chris and Thomas are like encyclopedias, so ask away.
Yeah, and if there's anything that's tickling your fancy, feel free to let us know about it. I mean, I'm super interested in just the fact that there's so many different payloads on this launch, testing so many different things, and I think even one of the things I saw was like a nuclear detonation detection experiment of some kind, because we have that. That's a thing right now in orbit, is on various satellites, is the ability to detect a nuclear detonation, and I guess something on STP-3 is going to be testing out some methodology for that.
Yeah, I can actually talk about that a little bit.
It's
actually
please.
going to directly complement what we are more familiar with as the Sibers constellation. You would have heard several previous Atlas V missions that were named Sibers Geo and then a number. Those are geostationary satellites that use infrared wavelength instruments to detect things such as nuclear detonations for detecting testing around the world and things like that, and also non-nuclear implosions or just detonations and things like that. There is a new type of sensor suite that is being tested on the STP-3 spacecraft on this mission, and again, that is kind of right down the middle of the types of experimental payloads you can see on STP program missions. It's those kind of new sensor suites or those new spacecraft systems or other technologies that want to be tested for use on future national security missions, but need to be tested on a testbed of some kind first. And so the STP missions serve that purpose. And of course, this is the third dedicated STP mission. You could go back and find other missions that have STP designations. In fact, the most recent Astra launch, LV0007, also had an STP designation because it was associated with the Space Test Program. There's also been some Rocket Lab missions with STP designations, I think. But as far as dedicated missions, this is the third. The second was the most recent Falcon Heavy mission, so people may be remembering that mission as well. But yeah, that is another one of the big name payloads on board STP-3, the primary spacecraft on today's flight.
And one of the other ones that's pretty cool on that one too, Thomas, is the NASA laser communication experiment, where basically they're going to use this to shoot laser beams at the International Space Station to test communication, because lasers in the laser beam, right? The optical elements of those can be used to transmit data much more efficiently and much more strongly across these longer distances. So NASA is looking at laser communication demonstrations on this particular one It's called the Laser Communications Relay Demonstration because NASA likes large words like that. But this will basically be used in conjunction with a future in-space experiment, in particular called Illuma-T, which will be attached to the outside of the International Space Station next year in 2022. So that's another one that's on board. And I think, Thomas, of them on the satellites, those are the two that we really know what the experiments are. All the rest are the secret, don't look at this, there's nothing on here from the Department of Defense.
That's my favorite stuff of all.
Yeah. Those, I believe off the top of my head, those are the two payloads we know about. And of course, there's a differentiation to be made here between a payload and a spacecraft, because sometimes we use those words interchangeably, but realistically, a payload is what a satellite is carrying. So for example, if we're talking about a Starlink satellite, the payload of a Starlink satellite is the antenna, the communications equipment that the satellite actually houses. When we're talking about STP-3, we're talking about those two experiments, and I believe there are other experiments on that satellite that we don't know anything about, but those two at the very least. And then the secondary spacecraft, which has a handful of experiments on board as well for various DoD customers that we can't talk about because we don't know anything. But those are lots of different payloads, so there's a couple handfuls of payloads on this mission, but only two spacecraft, two satellites. So that's another differentiation in case there's some confusion there.
The fun part about that is we can just make stuff up. I heard there's a 1U CubeSat called CoolSat, which is basically a cube with sunglasses on it. You can't disprove me. We don't know.
like the disguise. Oh wait. Like the disguise sunglasses, Jack.
Yes, perfect. Perfect.
So now we know what Jack would do if he had the money to launch a 1U CubeSat.
That's actually a really good question to contemplate. What would I actually do? Maybe I would make CoolSat. Who knows? Here's a question from Ashley. I think we might have talked about this earlier a little bit when we were talking about the asymmetric thrust from the solid rocket boosters. They're asking, does the SRB's nozzle allow for minor gimbal, or is it fixed? Is it all the RL, the RD-180s?
I believe these solids on Atlas V are non-gimbaling, but Christy will correct me if I'm wrong.
I believe you're correct, yeah.
Okay. I believe the liquid engine, the RD-180 engine, does all of the gimbaling on an Atlas V.
Although I know other variants of the GEM solid rocket motor series both gimbal and are static. That's an excellent question that I'm not. The AJ60s didn't, but I don't believe the GEM 63s do either. But I'll double check just to make sure because they did change.
Gotcha.
Very cool.
Hey, so Chris.
Yo, Julia.
I'm going to do a little nature preserve check because I'm in an unfamiliar area. This is the first time I have been on this particular part of base for an event. And I'm familiarizing myself with the sounds, which, mind you all, we do have noise-canceling headsets, which is a bit disconcerting when you don't know the sounds around you. So, hey, Chris, have you seen any security guards? Because I hear some weird chattering behind me, which I'm thinking is frogs, but it's either frogs or birds.
I have not seen any because it's so dark. There's no moon, and we're on a very, very secluded part of base. I did, however, hear them as we were driving in. Yes, our security is here. Yes.
That's the other disconcerting part. I'm a little closer to the road because with the noise-canceling headphones, I can't exactly hear what's in front of me. But we're really close to the water over here, so just wanted to let you all know that.
One ear cup on, one ear cup off. That's the methodology here.
Yeah, something like that. Like I'm looking right in front of me, and that's a perfect spot for a gator to go tummy up toward me.
Just zigzag, right? Just leave the gear. It'll be fine. Just zigzag. It's always what they told you growing up in Florida is if a gator's chasing you, zigzag.
But I will say,
is that true or is that like a fable kind of thing?
Just run, no. Just run.
No, that's it, Julia. Like we are. You're not wrong, Jack. We are legitimately taught in school, at least I was, in the 90s, that's how you zigzag to get away from an alligator. Just run.
Like, just get away from it.
Just run. They can only do like short bursts out of the water. Just run. Like,
Yeah, I don't think a gator is gonna look at someone doing a zigzag and be like, "Oh no, this is blowing my mind. I have no idea what to do now." Like,
it just stops, mouth open, like, whoa,
Yeah.
dude, what's he doing?
just if there's a gator, proceed as rapidly and efficiently as possible away from the gator. Zigzagging
And do
or not,
not-
I think that is appropriate advice.
Yeah, you
And
have
then
the
you get-
advantage on land still.
But don't think that putting a fence in front of you or in between you and that gator is really going to protect you, because once he
That's
gets
true.
his wind back, he could
They
just climb
climb.
that fence.
You know what? I never saw the crocodile hunter zigzag. Never saw him do it once.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
What does NASA Spaceflight talk about during extended holds? Well, how to run away from gators.
And
Well,
we
maybe-
are just doing a public service, okay?
At least
Okay?
it's not
So-
completely off topic. Like, Julia has a non-zero chance of encountering a gator right now.
Well, this is a courtesy to the folks who do launch viewing, like on 401, 528. You are right by the water, so I'm just saying this is a public service.
True.
All right, so to sum up, zigzag or not, just get away from the wildlife. Let's see. Here's a sort of a historical question. Orbitron Industries is asking, Slick 41 was used to launch Titan 3 and 4 rockets, right?
Yeah, it was indeed, yes. It started its life as part of the Titan program as we were sort of developing our bigger, more powerful, and more capable vehicles. So yeah, Slick 41 and its neighboring pad Slick 40 were the two that handled the Titans out of here.
I love me some Titan. I'm super, super sad that I only got to see so many shuttle launches, but I'm even more sad that I lived in Florida and there was Titan launches and I never saw a Titan launch.
Oh yeah.
Jack, you
What?
lived here and you never saw a Titan launch?
Yeah,
Oh, I don't know
regrets.
you anymore.
regrets, Julia. A Titan 4 with it had solids. It had two solid boosters, right? And a liquid center
Yep.
core. It's a
Yep.
heavy with solids. How
Yeah,
did I
it
never
was-
see that?
It was a tri-core rocket, but not really a tri-core rocket because it wasn't the same core 3 times.
So cool.
Yeah,
So
and
cool.
And it lit the liquid center core just before solid rocket motor burnout.
Right, it was
in
an
flight.
air-lit center core, yeah.
That's insane.
That's
I'm-
cool.
I hate myself now. Thanks.
Yeah, yeah. The Titans, like the Titans have that great. The Titans were the rocket where they did that great. The BBC guy did that great thing about energy.
Oh, yeah.
And about like how about how energy works when you ignite something and like the forces and everything. And it was a single take that he
Nope.
had this
Nope.
and was yep.
Nope. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I have to dispute this. I have to dispute it.
Go for it.
There's an edit
What-
point in there. Everyone is like, "This is such a great thing."
Is there
because
really?
yeah, there's totally an edit point in there.
Well, okay, hold on, because I've seen the clip. At first he's walking next to like a Centaur 5 or something and talking about it, and then they cut to a different scene where he says like one line and then points at the launch, right?
Yes.
Okay, so there's
Yeah,
the
like,
edit
and
point
what you
before
get
that
is
line,
yeah.
but not between that line and the rocket actually launching.
Yeah, I hate to be the actually guy. It's a really cool
Yeah.
video and succinct, but there's like I don't know. That one kind of always irked me whenever I saw it being touted as like it's a single take. It's like, although now I'm second guessing myself, but nobody in chat has any idea what we're talking about. If mods could link up that video, and if you want to go see that at some point, and that you can put it in the comments or at me or something and be like, no, it's a great take. If you disagree, I mean it's good. It is good. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, the video, for those of you who don't know, it's basically he's talking about energy and he's talking about the potential and how you can put all these things together and you can do it in a very controlled way to get the desired force that you want. But what he says is you put them all together and you get that. And it's the moment he says that bang, the solids on the Titan light and the thing lifts off the pad. It's a really cool shot, even if it's edited.
Yes, I completely agree with. And Marto is linking that in chat. So thank you for that. The debate continues. Let's put it that way. We'll put it to rest for now. Let's go back to admiring Titan 4. I love Titan 4.
Yeah, maybe we'll have to make an NSF version of that take somehow. I don't know if that's
Ooh, an
something-
SLS?
But we would
there
have
you
to do
go.
We would have to do it
Well, okay,
actually
hold on.
in one take, and it would have to be
Yeah.
like some kind of cool Steadicam shot through the press site. Which now we're getting ideas. The gears are turning here. This is how inspiration happens.
Christy, here's the problem with doing it at SLS though. You get a 6-second like heads up because of the main engine's lighting. You got to do
know.
something that there's no visual indications that ignition's coming, because otherwise it's cheating.
So Vega.
There you go. Like a Vega, or like if we get a Minotaur back here or something, we could do it there.
Yeah, Vega or Minotaur, yeah. But anyway, all of those rockets that we just spent 10 minutes talking about are not the ones on your screen.
Right? Yeah. Well, they launched from this pad, so it's relevant.
Yes.
We're fine.
Yes, it's all relevant. We are here, however, for the Atlas pad, but you are here for basically this is our version of hold music, right? as we wait for the Atlas 5. Its new launch time is 5:03 a.m. Eastern, 10:03 UTC, 59 minutes into its 2-hour launch window for the STP-3 mission. Everything had been going according to plan. There were no technical issues that they were working. But when they got down to their final decision point, some of the upper level wind data that they had from a balloon wasn't quite what they were wanting, so they pushed 59 minutes into the window to get some more time to review. But some tweets and everything that they had and commentary that they had right before they altered the time here indicated that they weren't expecting a prolonged hold. It ended up being 59 minutes, so nothing really that indicates that, oh my gosh, we should be super worried about upper level winds, but that was the reason for our 59-minute delay here today. And upper level winds are not included in the pre-launch weather forecast that you see from the 45th Space Wing here of the Space Force, because upper level winds are not only user dependent, so like ULA themselves have different rules than SpaceX, than NASA, than Northrop Grumman, than Astra will have when they are here, but they are also, for the Atlas, it can be literally configuration specific. So that's why the 45th doesn't bother trying to figure out for each individual rocket and each individual configuration of a rocket what is the percentage chance of the upper level winds. They just don't include that in the percentage forecast, and then they hand all the data to ULA in this case, and ULA is the one that makes the decision, are the upper level winds acceptable or not, whereas the Space Force weather officers would make that same is the weather good determination for things like precipitation and lightning and our electrical rules and electrical potential charges in the atmosphere and stuff like that.
And now, Christy, we're talking about this hold that we've extended, or ULA has extended, of course. And I'm going to ask you to debunk a conspiracy theory that's in my brain right now. And I'm putting on my Space Force Space Test Program spookiness hat here. We were told before this launch that it was a 2-hour launch window. Now, sometimes we do have launch windows that are exactly something like 2 hours, like a nice round number. And sometimes we're told it's a 2-hour window, but in reality, the people at ULA and the Space Force know it's like 2 hours and 2 minutes or something like that. You know, there's not quite exactly 2 hours. When they announced that they were looking at upper level winds and needed to push, ULA originally said, we're waiting a few minutes for some new data. But that few minutes turned into a 59-minute delay. So here's my question to you, and I'm wondering if this is even possibly correct. Is it possible that there are actually only 3 launch opportunities tonight? The 404 launch opportunity that they've since forfeited, the 503, and then like a 602. And it's that they have a launch opportunity every 59 minutes, and they chose 3 to make a 2-hour launch window approximately?
So it's possible. It's possible, and we have seen ULA sort of employ this before, even when they have, like for some of the interplanetary missions, specifically I am thinking about the Perseverance rover, the Lucy mission, things like that, where they had 2-hour-long launch windows, but because of the profiles that the Atlas needs to fly as you progress through that window, they don't actually have every single minute of that window. They have to pick so that they can update the guidance accordingly so that the rocket, with its RAN steering, right ascension of the ascending node steering, knows how to fly the correct profile based on how far you push into your window. So entirely possible that because of some of the specifics of this mission, there are 3 distinct opportunities, and because it's a DoD flight, they just didn't say that. It's also possible that that few minutes they did actually get weather balloon data back. Then that weather balloon data wasn't enough for them to concretely make the determination, yes, we're able to go, no, we're not. So at that point, you would just be at the mercy of when is the next weather balloon that the 45th is scheduled to launch. They launch them every 30-ish minutes or so as you get closer to your T0 time. And then, of course, it takes them some time to ascend up to altitude and for that data to then be reviewed. So it might just have been that they became they got to a point where they were just at the mercy of when the next weather balloon will go. So that is definitely a possibility there as well.
I am 100% here for the spooky speculation, Thomas. I just want you to know that. I mean, there's plenty of reasons why you would want to obfuscate your launch time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, what it probably isn't is it's probably not this like, oh, well, it was always going to be 503, and the winds are just the thing they're choosing to like obfuscate.
Right?
Exactly
No, they
like
wouldn't do that.
What you were saying, they wouldn't do that. No. Because it's going to geostationary, geosynchronous orbit is technically where it's going. It's going a little shy of true geostationary because they still have to drift to the correct location and everything like that. But yeah, because of how getting to geostationary orbit works and how you can drift and everything, you would have the whole 2 hours to lift off. But yes, other than that, you can see the gaseous oxygen venting away from the Atlas V booster there, those white vapors. And you can actually see the umbilicals. If you look very closely, you can see the big gray tower with the ULA on it. You can see some of the umbilical lines that are providing data and electrical connections. To the rocket, there was just a
you saw that too,
shooting
right?
star. Yep, there was just a shooting star that appeared right over the pad. I think it was right out of view of the camera, but that was phenomenal. But yes, you can see.
Well, thanks for teasing us with that.
Right?
Darn
Yeah.
it.
Sorry, guys. We didn't see that one coming. We would have pointed the camera, but
Yeah.
you don't get a lot of notice for those.
No, you don't. But the reason I was talking a little bit about the umbilicals, since we have.
Clearly full of cereal.
Cool. So one of the reasons that I was bringing up the umbilical lines that you can see going over from the tower is because the Centaur upper stage is encased entirely inside the payload fairing. So in order to fuel the Centaur upper stage and get data and electrical connections, all of those have to go through the payload fairing to the rocket, as well as the vent lines that come out of the Centaur to properly vent the liquid hydrogen out to the flare stack and everything. So at liftoff, there's actually a hydrogen vent support arm on the payload fairing that stays with the payload fairing as the rocket ascends. So, and that is sometimes very, very visible, usually more so in the daytime, but that is usually a very visual thing as the rocket begins to roll. And sometimes because of the lights that they use, it can be very visible when they're initially starting to come off of the launch pad. So if you see something sticking out of the payload fairing after liftoff, totally normal for the Atlas.
Also, I have a bit of an update. Jack, thank you for linking me this. Turns out ULA totally described the launch window. It is at exactly 2 hours long, and there are launch opportunities at the top of every single minute of that launch window. So my conspiracy theory has been debunked officially by ULA. My apologies for missing up that detail prior to launch.
All right, everybody, take off your tinfoil hat. Set it aside. We'll put them on later, but not right now.
But that also goes to your point, Thomas, and what we were talking about earlier of ULA saying exactly what we had just been saying. They don't actually have every second of the 2 hour window. They have 120 single second opportunities at the opening of every single minute.
They actually said 121, so I guess that means the end of the last minute is also a launch opportunity or something.
Oh, no,
I don't
because
know.
it opens at 0, so 1
Oh,
minute would
right.
technically be 2, and off you go on that. So yeah,
Yeah, okay.
121 for a 120-minute window. Yeah, would make sense. Yeah. Yeah.
Neat. And we are currently looking at 37 minutes, just under 38 minutes to go until the next launch opportunity. I don't think we're tracking any issues right now, or, I mean, do we know if they're still looking at the upper level winds or what the status with that is?
That would likely be what they're doing, is they're just waiting for the next weather balloon data set to come in at this point.
And again, the launch window is 2 hours. It opened at 4:04, but that launch opportunity was not taken advantage of due to this upper level wind data that they're looking at. But that means they have all the way up till 6:04 a.m. Eastern Time, or 11:04 UTC is the end of the window. So we're right about targeting the middle of the window at this point. So there's actually room to push further if needed, but hopefully that won't be necessary, and we get some good upper level winds data to allow a launch at 5:03 Eastern or 10:03 UTC.
And one thing that's really interesting about the two missions that are sort of coming up against one another here this week, right? We have the Atlas tonight, and then 2 days from now, we have the XP launch. And XP is really, really small, and so are these test satellites really kind of on board the Atlas here today. But I'm bringing this up because both of these rockets have to do something that we don't always see on various missions. And after they get into their initial orbits, they have to do these really massive plane changes to alter the orbital inclination from 28.5 degrees, which is where the Cape is. So going due east, that's wherever you are, latitude is the lowest inclination you can get to when you launch, and then you have to get to orbit, and then you can adjust your inclination from there, more or less. And Atlas will be dropping the inclination down to 0. It's going to do it out in geosynchronous distance, roughly 31,600 kilometers away from Earth. But the Falcon 9 will also have to do this on Thursday morning, but it is only going to low Earth orbit. So we have two rockets that have to do really intense inclination changes here for their particular missions over the next few days, and that does have a slight performance hit to the mass that they can take, right, Thomas?
Right, yeah, and that Falcon 9 mission that's coming up here, a lot of people point out, like, oh, it's such a small spacecraft, and it's going to low Earth orbit. Why isn't it a return to launch site mission? Well, it's because they got to save a lot of fuel in that upper stage for that plane change maneuver. This mission as well, you'll notice it's got the 5 solid strap to it. That's the highest performing version of Atlas V. But the spacecraft on board, it's 2 spacecraft that are not particularly big. They're not super tiny. But this isn't a very heavy payload either. Not that we have exact mass figures because, again, Space Test Program, Space Force, put your tinfoil hats on for a second. But
okay, it's on. I got it on. Yeah. Let's go. Let's do this.
But they've got the highest performance version of this rocket because it is not only going to geosynchronous altitude, but also doing that plane change maneuver. And all of that just requires Centaur to have as much propellant as possible to finish the mission.
And thank you for doing exactly what I had hoped you would do, Thomas. We had not talked about that, but you picked up exactly what I was putting down, because these are the 2 ways that you can reserve enough propellant in your second stage to do those huge inclination changes. The Atlas, you just slap more solid rocket boosters onto it because that allows your core stage to do more, impart more velocity, so therefore the second stage, the Centaur, doesn't have to do as much to haul it into the initial parking orbit, so there's more propellant left to do the rest of the mission. The Falcon 9 just does it a different way. It forgoes the ability to come back to the launch site and just uses that propellant in the first stage to leave the second with the propellant that it needs to do the inclination change. So 2 different ways of arriving at the same conclusion with your various systems there.
And of course, there's also another way that SpaceX could solve that problem if they were facing, a high if ULA got really desperate and we went back a few years to some early Atlas concepts, there's the tri-core rocket there was a tri-core Atlas concept at one point. Of course, SpaceX actually has a tri-core version of Falcon 9. We all call it Falcon Heavy. And if a, drone ship recovery Falcon 9 still isn't enough, but they want to get some Falcon 9 components back, they'll launch a Falcon Heavy and recover those 3 boosters, but that performance is greater. And again, leaves the upper stage with more propellant and more performance to do whatever the mission is. So Falcon Heavy or SpaceX can pull that card too by adding more boosters.
Yes.
When Falcon Super Heavy?
Oh, there we go.
Oh, I think that's just called Starship, and it's in Texas right now.
But now coming to Florida, we can now finally for sure. Obviously, it's been in work for a while, but Elon mentioning it more recently. So, anyway,
Definitely excited to see Starship on the pad in Florida and in Texas. And we were talking about this on, what was that? Was that on NASASpaceflight Live? We were saying, imagine seeing SLS on the pad and Starship at the same time. The battle of the big rockets. I mean, who doesn't want that?
yeah, here on the Space Coast, and I say, why not just keep extending that? If you've got a rocket on 39B and a Starship at 39A, stick a Vulcan out on 41, get a Falcon 9 out at 40. There's some other rockets farther down Rocket Road here. That's,
Put a new Glenn out. Do the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, a new Glenn. Put some Relativity, a Tehran of some kind can come out here. Firefly's got a pad out here. Astra at the very end.
Yep. We could recreate like those 1960s images of the Cape with just like a whole bunch of nuclear missiles, but with actual non-kill rockets, which are way better.
It is also a little funny that Astra is using the pad right next to the New Glenn pad. It's really the two extremes of the sizes here on the Space Coast.
Small rocket and big rocket.
What I love too about the pad that Astra's going to use here is the stubby little lightning tower. So we're still going to get the question of what are the towers? They're so comically small because they don't need to be large. I love that pad. Yes.
The question for those launches from chat, and I'm giving you the job right now, chat. Remember this: is why are the towers so stubby? Not what are the 4 towers. The question should just be why are the 4 towers so small? Let's see if I can find some more questions. Really quick, Taylor Van Camp, thank you so much for the support. They're asking, why does Starliner need an Atlas with solids? Is it because of the weight? And hypothetically, could there be an Atlas 451? Keep up the great work. Smiley face heart. Thank you so much, Taylor, for the support.
Yeah, so you are right. It comes down to the mass of Starliner in large part, but there's another component to it as well. So it's not just the mass, because Starliner is very, very heavy for an Atlas. It's also the depressed trajectory through the atmosphere that the Atlas has to fly to maintain the safe abort boundaries at any point in flight for Starliner. So because it has to fly the depressed trajectory, Atlas normally flies a very lofted trajectory because while the Centaur is an extremely efficient upper stage with its RL-10 engines, it is a very, very low thrust upper stage. In fact, when it comes off that Atlas booster, its thrust to rate ratio is like 0.8. And it takes a long time in that burn to the parking orbit to get the thrust to rate ratio of the Centaur over 1. So because of that, the Atlas booster normally flies a very lofted, high trajectory, give it as much altitude as possible to then allow the stage to do its thing without falling back into the atmosphere. But you can't go up that high for crew because the G-forces, if you aborted and came back into the atmosphere, would kill you on that steep of a trajectory. So Atlas has to fly a very shallow trajectory for the very, very heavy Starliner payload. So it needs the dual engine Centaur upper stage for the added performance plus the redundancy if one of the engines wouldn't work. But it also needs the 2 solid rocket motors to thrust the vehicle more so that the stages can still get you to the suborbital drop-off point without coming so low into the atmosphere on that Centaur upper stage burn that would destroy you. So that's why we've got the 2 solid rocket motors on the Atlas. To answer your other question, could you make up for a single Centaur on Starliner by just strapping 2 more solid rocket motors? No, you cannot, because at that point you would begin to violate the G-force limits experienced during solid rocket flight, that the crew would not be able to handle, but also the Starliner, the more thrust you put on there with the solid rocket motors, the Starliner's engines would not be able to get you away from the top of the Atlas during solid rocket motor flight if you put 4 on instead of 2. So that's why there are 2.
I would also add to that without a 5-meter payload fairing and the associated structural elements like we were talking about earlier, I don't believe an Atlas V can actually handle more than 3 solid rocket boosters.
That's true.
Or either 4-meter or, this, which is more similar to the Starliner configuration. But the 4-meter fairing version, you won't see more than a 4-3-1, simply because of how the loads from those solid boosters are transferred through the structure of the rest of the vehicle, which is why you only see the 4 and 5 solids on Atlas Vs with the big 5-meter payload fairing. Also, to add to the Starliner discussion very briefly, Falcon 9 does the same thing. It follows a very shallow trajectory for those abort G-force reasons, and that is why, even though, the new version of Dragon is also a heavier spacecraft, but that is one of the reasons that all the crew missions will have drone ship recoveries and not return to launch site recoveries, because those trajectories are shallower for crew abort reasons.
Man, you guys are just a wealth of knowledge. Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome, Jack.
And thank you, Taylor, for the good question and for the support. We really appreciate it. Thank you to everybody who's super chatted tonight. And of course, thank you to all of our members. If you guys don't know, we've got a member program on YouTube that comes with perks for various levels of support. You get YouTube chat, oh my gosh, what is the word I'm looking for? Exclusive chat emoji. There we go. That's members only. I'm going to throw a Tory Heavy into chat right now just for our members because it's appropriate. And like NASA Spaceflight, Chris Bergen in chat is saying, more perks lately and more to come for our members. There's also a Capcom level, which you get Discord access, Capcom and above. And there's other good stuff in there like preview videos that go live before the daily videos do, pictures from Mary and Nick and folks out in the field. The other day I happened to be in Palmdale and I went by the shuttle carrier aircraft 911 and took a video of that really quick. So all kinds of stuff in the members preview area there on YouTube. So thank you so much to all of our members. And if you like what we do, consider supporting what we do by becoming a member. There's a nice, Michael. There's the little sign up page right there. And there's the different levels. And yeah, Capcom and above gets Discord access. We've got a whole entire Discord with more channels than you can shake a stick at. And there's a gaming channel. There's a tech channel. It's every day there's a new channel. But there's some really good discourse in that Discord. So definitely consider popping into there. And yeah, thanks to all of our members. Let's see. Back to questions. Here's some more engine discussion. A cat that speaks Japanese is asking, is there any specific reason why Boeing chooses a dual-engine second stage for flying Starliner capsule? Any certain benefits over a single engine? Well, I can think of one, and that is redundancy.
Yep. Yeah. That is primarily it. It is the redundancy on it. But it is also... it also has to do a little bit with the answer that we were giving a little bit earlier as to why are there 2 solid rocket motors on the Atlas that launches Starliners. For the dual engine one, it is also a performance thing because it is the most efficient way on that trajectory to use it, but it is also largely just in case one doesn't light or you lose one during the ascent. You still have the second one under you.
Very cool. Thank you, Anthony King. Thank you for the support. They say, to help with the great daily vlogs you do, a massive thanks. Do people still call things vlogs? Either way, thank you, Anthony, so much for the support. The daily videos take a huge amount of work. Mary and Nick and all the editors and everyone, Brady and Pauline making the thumbnails. It's a whole production. So thank you for the support there. And Magic Skates, again, a lot of support from Magic Skates tonight. Thanks, buddy. They say, don't worry, Jack, I'm still wrapping my mind around everything just said. Yeah, you and me both, buddy. Got 2 buddies on that. Sorry. I'm getting too informal with the viewers. Here we go. Here's a question from Tony Jebson saying, when do you think we'll see ACES? Which is, if you guys don't know, ULA's plan for engine reuse, right? Was that ACES or is that the upper stage thing?
No, that's the upper stage. Smart is the engine reuse. Yes.
Smart. Thank you. Okay. Ignore everything I say. Let's talk about ACES.
ACES is like the advanced cryogenic something stage. I forget
The
what the E
evolved
stands.
stage, I think.
Evolved. Thank you. Yes. Thomas, do you want to talk a little bit more about ACES or ACES?
Yeah, it's basically just. I mean, we
It's
talked about it a
like
while.
Super Centaur, right?
Yeah, the ULA talked about it when they were first talking about the whole smart reuse concept. It was related, where they said, well, we can drop off the first stage's engines and recover them with via parachutes and things like that. But then also, we could, in some ways, reuse the upper stage if we left it on orbit and refueled it. So that was one big capability of ACES, is its ability to be refueled and then be used for, like, kind of as a space tug. Also, it was just simply a bigger stage that had more performance with more engines. So a higher thrust, but same liquid hydrogen, liquid oxygen propellants for high efficiency. It is more or less just take Centaur and make it even higher performance. As a result of, since that was originally announced, the Centaur 5, which is the upper Centaur stage on the Vulcan rocket, has kind of evolved that its baseline design is more or less an ACES, to be honest. So whether or not we see something called an ACES later on remains to be seen. Centaur 5 will have a lot of capabilities baselined into it already, including its RCS system will be fueled by liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen rather than its own dedicated hydrazine system. So removing the second propellant system, that was something that Tori Bruno talked to me about a couple of years ago when discussing Vulcan certification and things like that. That's just one evolution I can think of off the top of my head, but basically ACES is kind of this word that ULA can sometimes throw around that really just means maybe a future evolution of Centaur. It's not really a firm plan or anything, simply because Centaur 5 is going to be a pretty powerful upper stage already, and they might not need further evolutions, at least not anytime soon. Does that mean we'll never see something called ACES and another evolution? Probably not. I think it's safe to say that that could still happen, but it might look very different from the initial proposal.
And I think that's sort of the way to do it, right? Like, even if the name changes, like you're saying, like Centaur 5 will have most of what it is. Like, that's the way to do it. You bake it into the design from the beginning, even if you're not completely where you want to be. And I'm mentioning this because they're not baking in smart reuse from the beginning with Vulcan. And even though Tori says, yeah, that's totally still a thing, we've been doing this for 70 years, and I can count on one hand with multiple fingers left over how many times someone has said, yeah, we'll add that down the road.
Right.
And it actually happened. So I don't know about smart reuse, but baking in the ACES stuff to Centaur 5 is a really good idea, because it gets you some of that capability to begin with. And then if you want to end up using the Centaur 5 as the on-orbit refueling, platform, you totally can at that point.
Just want to back up really quick and mention that hydrazine is very nasty stuff, so it's cool that they've... You said they've gotten rid of it on the current version of Centaur, or they're going to get rid of it?
On Centaur 5, so when the Centaur that is powering Vulcan comes online, its baseline design does not have a separate propulsion system for the RL-10 engines and the RCS system. They both are powered by liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen. So there's not separate hydrazine tanks. There's not separate pressurization systems. It's all drains from the main LH2 and LOX tanks.
Eliminating both mass and kill gas.
Yes.
Julia, you were saying something there when I mentioned hydrazine bad. What were you going to say?
I just don't want to see any orange clouds. Orange clouds bad.
Right.
Yeah, that is what hydrazine looks like. That is hydrazine, right? It's orange.
Yep.
Or is that a different hypergolic?
I mean,
No,
most hypergolics are that color, I think, but hydrazine is the big one.
Right, so definitely no spicy clouds, please. That would be very bad. Let's see, what else we got here in terms of questions? Wow, we have a what denomination is that? We have a very generous amount of support from Alpha with no comment for me to riff on, but thank you for the support there, bud. Here's a sort of a almost philosophical question. Why is Atlas called Atlas?
Mighty Atlas.
Mighty Atlas. Yeah, I mean, so Atlas, sort of like the Titan rockets that we were talking about earlier. Well, Atlas started as an ICBM. It started as an intercontinental ballistic missile in the 50s and 60s, and then some of the Atlas missiles were taken and human rated for the Mercury program. So Atlas, I don't remember exactly where the name stemmed from, but it has to do with that idea of like power and circumnavigation of the world and things like that. Holding the world on your shoulders, the safety of the world. Things like, I don't know. Go back to the 1950s and ICBMs and mutually assured destruction, and there you go. That's where a lot of the names for these systems came from. And of course, the Atlas we see today has almost exactly nothing in common aside from the name with the Atlas lineages. Same with the Deltas. The Deltas are really Deltas in name only. They underwent massive redesigns for the Delta IV and the Atlas V that really removed the final commonalities that they had back to their origination points. So like the Centaur evolved, the Common Centaur evolved from past versions of the Atlas, but isn't the same. The Atlas booster itself is absolutely not the same, yeah. Okay, and we are, sorry for the pause there, I was listening in on the back channel there. We are still red for upper level winds, will not be launching at 5:03 a.m., so there will be another extension to this hold, again, for upper level winds. Again, as a reminder, our launch window today runs until 6:04 a.m. Eastern, 11:04 UTC. And again, we are holding again and waiting for a new T0. Of course, when I say we are holding again, they have been in the T-4 minute hold here for about an hour now or so. But that L- clock is what will now be readjusted. L- meaning the time to launch, and T- meaning the time on the actual clock, and those will synchronize at 4 minutes prior to liftoff.
Yep.
But again, we are going to await a new T0 time. No word on if that is a push to the end of the window or what they will do just yet. So we will wait and hear what our new T0 time is here today. But again, the window does go until 6:04 a.m. Eastern, 11:04 UTC. And the new T0 is 10:19 UTC or 5:19 a.m. Eastern time. So not a huge delay there for not a huge push there. So 10:19 UTC, which is 5:19 a.m. Eastern.
That is just over half an hour from now, so we're still approaching the business end of this countdown.
Yeah, and hey, I mean, nobody likes a hold, but if we need to buy some time on air, we can always talk about the whole ULA's planned holds thing with the L- clock versus the T- clock you were talking about, Chris.
Yeah, actually, let's talk about that because this is the more usual way. I would say that we are used to countdowns happening here in the U.S., although I think that's changed quite a lot in the last couple of years. But basically, there are two ways you can do a countdown. You can either start the clock, and that is the clock, and you are counting down toward your launch time, and there are no holds, so any issues that do pop up, that means you have to stop. You have to actually stop the clock, and you're automatically moving the launch time. This is how the Falcon 9s do it. This is how the Soyuzes do it. This is how the Ariane 5 does it as well. And I'll mention Ariane 5 because all the world's eyes are going to be on that rocket in about 15 days. But that's how they do it, right? There are no holds. So if you do have an issue, you're just not launching at the time that you said. Now, Atlas, the Deltas, and some other rockets do utilize holds that utilize countdowns that have built-in holds. So you'll say, okay, we have a 5-hour countdown and we're launching at 5 a.m., but that doesn't mean that your countdown starts at midnight, 5 hours before launch, because you've got these built-in holds. So a ULA countdown might start 6.5 hours ahead of launch, and it will take you 6.5 hours to count that 5-hour period of time because you've built in an hour and a half of holds in there. And that allows you to have stable stop points. So if you're running a little bit farther behind, and like Atlas, you fuel well before liftoff, and you're not quite ready to fuel when you thought, you have some wiggle room in there, right, where you can start fueling a little bit later than you had originally anticipated, but you've built in time for those eventualities, so you can still launch at the opening of your launch window. Whereas like if it was a Falcon 9 and they couldn't start fueling on time, you wouldn't make the opening of your launch window because of how quickly before launch they fuel and they don't use holds. So just do different ways of doing the same thing and getting there. No one way is necessarily better than the other, because we have multiple examples of rockets with built-in holds that scrub for technical issues or weather, and we have numerous examples of rockets that don't utilize holds launching right on time with no issue. And vice versa. So there's no like one way is better to do a countdown. It's just the two ways that there are to do a count.
No, you know what? I know I'm supposed to be impartial, but I'm gonna go on record and say the one way that's better is the straightforward way because it's easy to understand. But that's just me being a grumpy guy.
Yeah, because sometimes the clocks can get a little bit tricky, right? Like if you look at our clock right now, it'll say L minus, right? So that is the time until liftoff. But that is not the time on the ULA clocks right now. The time on the ULA clock is T-minus 4 minutes and holding. But that doesn't really give you anything when you just pop on over here and you say, oh, T-minus 4 minutes and holding, but how long? So, we usually use the L-minus clock for things like this just to help you all out in terms of understanding how far away from the actual liftoff we are, even though that's not the actual time on the countdown clock right now.
So, Chris, did you want to learn something new?
I mean, always. Go, Julia.
So, viewer Martine, we learned a little bit more about the Atlas here. The Atlas name was originally proposed by Carl Bossart and his design team working at Canaveral on Project MX 1593. So, it goes back to the design team at...
Very cool.
Kind of fancy. And thank you to our viewers for providing that answer.
Yeah, I saw that pop up in chat and wanted to pull it out and highlight it. Thank you for that.
And I just want to say, the upper level winds, what a tricky thing that is, because my view right now is, well, I'm sitting on a blanket that's really, really wet, so I can tell you it's very damp down here at the launch site. Not foggy, but very moist, for lack of a better word. The water in front of me is pretty still. There really isn't even much wind, don't you say, Chris? I mean, there's a breeze. I looked on the radar. There's like nothing going on. I don't even see a front. But yet, there's upper level winds. What is up with that, y'all?
Yeah, darn it. But I mean, you definitely don't want a rocket flying through a sudden, higher velocity layer of wind and getting some kind of shear. A rocket is just a very long stick. Mm-hmm. And you don't want to subject that to that kind of stress, right?
Right. So what you're saying is we don't want to launch into upper level winds and have the upper level winds play fetch.
Oh God. A rocket is a long stick is going to become my the internet is a series of tubes. I can see it now.
Well, and it's not the best way to sort of talk about upper level winds, but we take it seriously for, in reality, 14 very specific reasons, because upper level wind shear being out of limits were two of the contributing causes to the loss of Challenger and Columbia. So we take this very, very seriously, especially when the winds are right near their limits, because we haven't listened before. And
yeah, that's actually that's a really good point, Chris. I mean, it was what you're referencing, right? Is that one of the things that was found in the investigation. I know at least for
Yeah.
Challenger was that if the shear hadn't been quite so bad, that burn through on the O-ring might not have been quite so catastrophic.
Yeah, the basic thing was the wind shear on the day that they launched Challenger was way out of limits. That alone should have stopped them that morning, but didn't. And when the O-ring failed at solid rocket ignition, and the primary O-ring debris lodged into the secondary O-ring debris and formed the temporary seal right as they were lifting off the pad, it was hitting that windshield that dislodged it. And there was some evidence that if the wind shear had not been as bad or had not been present that morning, that they might have actually gotten to solid rocket motor separation on Challenger successfully and found it in post-flight. And then with Columbia, right around the time that the bipod ramp foam broke off is when she was going through a really intense wind shear pattern that was sort of right at the limits. It wasn't over, but it was sort of right at the limits of what the vehicle could handle, and that's when the bipod foam broke off.
I remember reading an article about these two instances of shear. Maybe I'm just thinking of a previous discussion we had about it on one of our streams, but a really fascinating bit, and honestly tragic, absolutely, utterly tragic bit of space shuttle history, but fascinating nonetheless.
Yeah, so, it's one of those things where it's like, when we talk about temperatures and when we talk about winds, we're sensitive to certain things because of how we learned the lessons.
Right. So sometimes what we can't see are the most dangerous things.
Yep.
I'll also add a little bit of kind of context and background that, because we keep talking about upper level winds and we also talk about upper level wind shear, and those are actually two different things. And the taller and skinnier the rocket, the more of a problem that shear value actually is. The upper level winds can actually be pretty low speed, the wind itself being at a lower velocity. But if the wind is changing direction or changing speed as you ascend through the atmosphere quickly, that can be more of a problem because it's like the rocket flying through a certain wind speed, and then all of a sudden the wind speed changes. And that applies different forces on the rocket and also can mess up your trajectory. If the winds are really high speed, but all in the same direction and kind of at the same speed as you go up, the rocket can usually just steer into the wind a little bit and it's actually fine. That shear is almost always much more of a problem than the wind speed itself. If the wind is changing direction and changing speeds as the rocket goes into the different parts of the atmosphere.
Let's see. Don't forget, if you have questions at NASASpaceflight, we will see your questions and potentially answer them. Here's one from, I'm gonna butcher your name. I'm sorry. There's accent marks that are scaring me. Matthias? They're asking, what launches next year are you most excited for? I mean, do I even need to say it?
There are two that come to mind. I'm not sure. Okay. I am most excited for either Artemis 1 or the Starship orbital flight test. I think my main source of excitement for the Starship test is that there's a high risk that doesn't go perfectly, but Artemis 1 is going to lunar orbit, and that in itself is really cool, and then coming back. So they're exciting in kind of different ways, but those are the two, which I guess kind of cheats, but there's my answer.
Chris? Julia? Who wants to take it? Come on, somebody.
I
mean-
Sorry. I was muted.
No, you're good.
Okay, so yeah, I will go with. I'm gonna go with Psyche. Psyche's launch in the summer of next year to continue studying the outer solar system and some of the asteroids and some of the things that are out there. That's a really neat science mission that's on tap for next year that I'm looking forward to, in addition to what Thomas said. Although I will say this, the one I'm really looking forward to better not end up being next year and better go in 15 days.
Oh.
But
yeah,
in
please
terms of the
let
ones
James Webb go and
manifested-
go successfully. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but in terms of the ones manifested to actually lift off next year, Psyche.
Yeah, if I could snap my fingers and change something in the realm of spaceflight immediately, a couple $1 billion extra to planetary science would be near the top of that list, if not at the top.
Yeah. But
Julia?
but 2022, I think I also want to just point out I think this means the Schiaparelli mission to Mars from the European Space Agency is on deck for next year. There are some Martian flights coming up, so 2022 should be a nice year.
Julia, how excited are you for Starship next year? No, seriously, what's going to be your favorite? I know. I joke though. What's going to be your favorite launch next year? The one you're most excited for?
You know, I honestly can't say I have a favorite yet. There's just so much that's coming up in 2022. I mean, we're looking at Astra launching from here. There's, like Chris was saying, there's more Mars missions coming up. We have other countries joining and going interplanetary. And it's just kind of fun watching other countries kind of get their feet under them. So I just think as a general rule, this whole next year is going to be very exciting and very busy.
Yeah, it's going to be a banner year on top of this year, which was already a banner year. It's going to be, I mean, this is the kind of trend I like. It's a graph, and the line is going upwards, and that makes me happy.
Exactly, and these launch pads getting full with the new providers, that's just the historian in me watching these older pads wake up again. That's a pretty cool thing.
Warms the heart. Definitely warms the heart.
Now, I also want to just point out two things, because we sort of mentioned the ones that we have the options of seeing ourselves here, right, in the U.S. But I think equally important for next year, the launch of the 2 science modules for China's space station are on deck for next year. So that's going to be huge for both them and the international research community to have 2 operational space stations in low Earth orbit.
Definitely looking forward to that. So,
and
I mean,
know what?
Go ahead,
I was just going to add to what he said. It's kind of been interesting watching China with their space station and how they handle the different aspects of sharing what they're doing there and their preparations. So it's adding another culture to it and seeing what their point of view is, or what their point of view that they're sharing with us is. So kind of curious to see how that develops.
Yeah, very, very cool stuff coming from China in the realm of spaceflight. There's a podcast I listen to that's called Dongfeng Hour. Oh my god, I'm terrible with the pronunciation, but it's a really great podcast, and I listen to it every week because it helps me keep track of what's going on in China. And there's so much going on that it's helpful to have a resource like that, and it's very exciting to see. And really quick, the launch I'm most excited for next year, I don't think I even need to say. You can all probably guess the launch. It's going to be Vulcan. I'm so excited for Vulcan. No, I am really excited for Vulcan, but no, I'm excited for Starship orbital testing. That's going to be awesome.
And a quick go ahead, Jack.
Yep, hearing in our back channel that we are currently green and proceeding with the countdown. So 16 minutes to go on the L- clock. ULA currently in a T-4 minute hold, which is nominal, and both clocks will sync up at 4 minutes to go, and we'll head into launch. And Gavin, who's out there, will be able to see his first launch. Knock on wood or IKEA plasterboard or whatever you got. Just knock on it.
Indeed. So definitely hoping to get Atlas off the ground today, not just for the payload customers, but for Gavin as well. But yeah, so I think we should talk a little bit about what we can expect here in the business end of our countdown, because you can see our L- clock right now is at 15.5 minutes. So what we'll be waiting for is roughly the 7-ish minute mark on that L- clock is when they will have the go, no go poll. That can vary. So I'll say about 7-ish on that. But that's when we'll have our final go, no go poll. Again, everything is currently green, so not expecting any issues at that point, but still the good verbal cues that everything is good, and that sense of excitement building as the launch team each gets to say that they are ready for the Atlas to lift off here. After that is done, at T-4 minutes, we will have the start of the synchronized sequence. and the auto sequence, at which point everything is very, very choreographed in terms of stopping the replenishment of the liquid oxygen to both the Atlas V booster stage and the Centaur upper stage, stopping replenishment of the liquid hydrogen into the Centaur upper stage as well, and then inerting the propellant lines and getting everything pressurized and ready for flight, and also handing off control of the count to the Common Core avionics on board the Atlas V. All of ULA's vehicles use the same Common Core avionics, whether they are an Atlas, a Delta, or the upcoming Vulcan vehicle, which is why all the countdowns kind of look very similar with a hold at T-minus 4 minutes. Yes, and then the final thing that we should hear over the countdown net is the Go Atlas, Go Centaur, Go probably STP-3 is what they will say. Final confirmation that the various elements of the rocket are ready. That usually comes at the 20-second mark. And then we'll have ignition and liftoff. And Thomas, I know for me personally, I love the sound the RD-180 engine makes when it ignites.
But I
just...
also... So obviously we get that on all Atlas V missions, but there's a little bit extra special when you get the sort of the whoomp of ignition of the RD-180, followed immediately by a bunch of solids joining in. You get both of them. We'll get both of them today, so that'll be good too.
Yeah, the way I describe it, and there are a limited number of Atlases left. Maybe out through 2026 for flights and stuff like that. So you still got time to come see one. But if you ever can, it's worth it, because to me, I love the sound this engine makes, because it sounds like it's groaning. Like it's just going, here we go, as it ignites. But it's such a distinct guttural sound that the RD-180 makes. Really, really good to see that. But then we will have ignition of the solid rocket motors and liftoff of the vehicle. Liftoff of Atlas V's actually occur after T0, so the countdown is not timed for liftoff right at T0. The RD-180 will light at about 2.7 seconds remaining in the count. The solids will light at about the 1.1 second mark into the count. And then we will have a near instantaneous liftoff as soon as all 5 solids ignite. Atlas will clear the tower very, very quickly and perform a very rapid pitch maneuver to head out due east from the launch pad, tracking down the range. She'll then perform a roll maneuver, getting herself into the proper orientation. The solids will burn for the first minute and a half of flight, jettisoning about a minute and 48 seconds into the flight. 2 will pop off first, and then 3. We will then continue onward for payload fairing separation, followed by core stage shutdown and separation just after the 4-minute mark into the flight. It's a clear night, so we should also see the solid rocket motors that are the separation systems on the Atlas booster fire to pull it away from the Centaur upper stage.
Which is also one of my favorite things to see on the Atlas V launch.
Yep. I love seeing those boosters come off and seeing them tumble.
Oh, gosh, yes. Yes.
It's always cool because you can, even if it's it's at nighttime, can't see them tumbling, but you can see the little flash of the hot nozzle, and you can see it occasionally. You see a little flash. Yep. So satisfying.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Look, we've got a tweet here from Tori Bruno saying, "Woohoo! Green upper level wins. Good job, everyone who thought those still thoughts." Make sure, if you're a member, throw a Tori Heavy into chat, because we just got an update from Tori. So come on, when is a better time?
Indeed. And Thomas, once it hands off to the upper stage, do you want to take it from there? Because the upper stage has some interesting things that it has to do on this mission.
Right. Initially, all it's going to be doing is actually just going to low Earth orbit, and a low Earth orbit inclined, like we said, 28.5.
Yeah, 28.5-ish.
28.5-ish degree inclination, which is just the lowest inclination you can get immediately when launching from here at Cape Canaveral. That will be the upper stage's first job, is to achieve a stable low Earth orbit. Once that happens, there'll be a coast phase, and then once the upper stage and its payloads are passing over the equator, it will light its engines again to raise the apogee, or the highest point in its orbit, from a circle to all the way out to an ellipse that reaches out towards geosynchronous altitude. And the highest point will be at that altitude, and the lowest point will be down where the low Earth orbit, parking orbit, was. And the reason you do that at the equator is so that when you get all the way out to geosynchronous orbit and do your circularization burn, which is also the plane change burn, you're doing so that in a way that leaves the orbit over the equator, because that's how you get to the proper geosynchronous orbit. So the second burn is that transfer burn, and then the third Centaur burn is at the very top of that ellipse, which turns the ellipse back into a circle at geosynchronous altitude, also changes the inclination down to 0 degrees, and that will be the final burn prior to separating the two spacecrafts.
Standing by for an update.
SRB ignition enabled.
LOX 2, verify CISA purge flowing GN2 to the CISA.
Verified.
OSM, verify the FCO, ROC, and OSM hull fire switches are in the proceed position.
Ready to proceed.
RLM, verify the redline monitor and event table in the correct configuration for terminal count.
Verified.
L-9 minutes.
RC, verify solar radiation acceptable for launch.
Verified.
Very cool. Hearing the launch net there.
We should also have our final go no go poll very shortly.
Launch on time verified.
Roger. LC switch to the ready position. All steps are complete prior to the status check.
All right. So next thing will be our final go no go poll for liftoff here today.
And you said that takes place in 4 minutes?
It takes place at roughly L-7, so any second now, really.
Oh, okay, great.
Is when we can expect that, yeah. So I'm not going to start saying anything too important. Yeah. And, but yeah, this will be, as Thomas was mentioning with everything that the upper stage is doing, this will be the longest flight of an Atlas rocket to date, at over 7 hours to complete its mission and get all of its payloads deployed and everything. So some new things that are on board this rocket that we will talk a little bit about here after the poll is complete, but there are some new technologies that Atlas is debuting
for their system
today.
status and
that Atlas is debuting as well, in addition to the test payloads that are on board the 2 satellites that the vehicle is launching as well. And on board the 2 payloads that we really know about on board the 2 satellites, one is from NASA. It's a laser communication demonstration test where they'll be using lasers to demonstrate new communication methods with the International Space Station. And the other one is the National Nuclear Safety Administration payload for a new sensor, new suite of
water. Go. Centaur systems, propulsion.
Go.
Pneumatics.
Go.
LO2.
Go.
LH2.
Go.
HASGAS.
Go.
Electrical systems airborne. Go. Ground. Go. Facility. Go. RF FTS.
Go.
Flight control.
Go.
GCQ. Go. Operation support. Go. COM.
Go.
Umbilicals.
Go.
ECS. Go. Redline monitor. Go. Quality.
go.
Op safety manager.
Go.
ULA safety officer.
Go.
Vehicle system engineer. Go. Anomaly chief.
Go.
Range coordinator.
Clear to proceed.
Launch director.
Launch vehicle is ready to launch.
Mission director.
You have permission to launch.
Proceeding with account. AL.
That was an amazing go, no-go poll. How clean was that? Did you hear the anomaly chief? He was like, go! That was awesome. What a great one.
That's the position that really wants to say go, right? Like we've
sure.
got no issues. Let's go, let's go.
That's what we want to hear. We're all go at 5 minutes, just over 5 minutes to go. Chris, I interrupted you. Did you have some wisdom you wanted to grace us with?
I think Thomas was about to say something too, really quick.
Yeah, if I had unmuted myself, that might have been more helpful. I was just going to point out that there is also one final status check right about 20 seconds before launch, where we'll hear that Go Atlas, Go Centaur, and Go STP-3 callouts to verify that the board is still green for launch.
Indeed. So in addition to the two payloads that we know of, the Atlas itself is also debuting a new enhanced power system to keep the two satellites fully charged during the prolonged 7.5-hour coast before their deployment. And the rocket itself is also debuting a new and upgraded navigation system as well. So two things that are being tested and flown for the first time on the Atlas as well today, in addition to the test payloads and satellites that are on board. And with that, we are about to pick up the terminal count here.
Exciting.
Very.
Indeed. And as we cross the 4-minute mark, so we are in the terminal count now. Clocks are ticking down again to the liftoff of the Atlas V here. This morning on the STP-3 mission, the Atlas is flying in its 551 configuration with a 5.5-meter diameter payload fairing 5 solid rocket motors from Northrop Grumman and a single-engine Centaur upper stage, that RL-10 engine on the upper stage being provided by Aerojet Rocketdyne. Overall, a 7.5-hour mission, more or less today, which will hopefully begin here in just over 3 minutes. This is overall the 90th flight of the Atlas V rocket. And the, what mission is it of the year for ULA, Thomas? 5th?
5th, yep.
Yes, the 5th flight of the year for United Launch Alliance, and their final one for 2021.
Just under 3 minutes to go.
Coolio.
Really quick, thank you, Kevin, for the support. They say I know this isn't a Starship stream, but I never miss a daily video. I must ask, how often do people transpose letters in Nick's surname? I don't know. I'm not Nick. You have to ask him. But thank you for the support. And
I'm going to start focusing on the camera and everything for our tracking here today. So I will turn over commentary to you all, and my voice will be back after liftoff.
Nice. You even did like an effect there by going off axis on the mic.
Yep. And while Chris gets his settings set up for liftoff here, I will be taking over our field commentary, and Chris will be handling the camera. And then after we lift off, we'll of course be listening into our ambient microphone for those sweet, sweet rumbles of 5 solid boosters and an RD-180 as Atlas V lifts off here very shortly.
Yeah, I'll be sure to not talk about my web browser during that portion of flight, or any portion of flight. Thank you, the Thrill de Will, for the support. They say Wen Fu. All right, coming up on 1 minute and 30 seconds to go. You can see that flare stack on the left is doing its thing. That is nominal. No worries there. It is just burning off excess hydrogen. You don't want to just let the hydrogen sit around and be flammable. You want to burn it off actively, proactively. And you can see Chris is getting the camera set there and dialed in for launch. It'll be a little bit dark, but rockets are bright.
Yep.
Little thing I learned.
Rockets will fix that real quick. No worries there.
So,
Coming up on the 1 minute mark here.
Excellent. 1 minute to go.
Atlas V about to turn night into day. Less than a minute to go now for the launch of the STP-3 mission. Countdown proceeding, everything on track. Now while Chris activates the tracking mount on the camera, you'll of course be well aware that with 5 solids this thing is going to leap off the pad.
Yeah, it's sort of the opposite of Slick Atlas, right? Where it sort of crawls off the pad. Here we go, just about 30 seconds to go.
And that final status check has come back. Go for launch. Less than 20 seconds to go for Atlas V. 10 seconds. Standing by for RD-180 ignition. There's RD-180 ignition. And booster ignition and liftoff of the Atlas V rocket. The STP-3 mission with payloads for NASA and the U.S. Department of Defense cleared the towers. Just over 1 minute into the flight, Atlas V with an early sunrise and ripping a hole through the Florida morning sky. Those 5 solid boosters and RD-180 at full thrust. We are going to be coming up on booster separation. Those 5 solids will be jettisoned from the vehicle as they expel the last of their solid propellants. Everything on track so far on this launch. The initial phase of flight looking good.
That sound was fantastic, and then also fantastic is this track from Chris.
An absolutely gorgeous view from Cape Canaveral here, a crystal clear sky, and we're seeing that clean burn. There is solid booster jettison, the booster is falling away. Nominal separation of all 5 solid boosters.
We were talking about that a minute ago. You can see them tumbling.
That is so cool.
We're now watching the RD-180 liquid fuel engine with the sole responsibility as first stage flight continues now. Those 5 boosters done their job. Next up will be payload fairing separation because, of course, the fairing also encompasses the upper stage. So the fairing's got to separate next, as well as that CFLR deck we were talking about. Those separation events are next up on our mission timeline. Everything going well so far. First stage flight continuing.
And like you said, the next thing up is fairing sep, right?
Yes, sir. See, Chris G still getting the track. It's starting to get fainter down in the sky as it heads east here from Cape Canaveral, but we still got an eye on it here from the press site.
It's phenomenal work. It's at the stage of flight where if you blink for a second, you've lost it. Way to go, Chris.
Yep.
You can see ULA's animation there of what we're seeing on the ground.
Yeah, we are probably going to... The camera also loses it before the human eye, because we get a little bit of an advantage with our, the Mark 1 eyeball, but also standing by with some telemetry and things provided by ULA. Again, the flight is proceeding nominally so far.
Mark 1 eyeball, you've been hanging out with DOS too much. We're not enough. There you go, fairing sep.
And there is payload fairing separation. And did they call out CFLR deck sep as well? It looks like they did, yep. So those separation events have gone nominally. Now the one thing we are going to be standing by here from the press site is hopefully a view of those SEP motors firing when the first stage is shuts down. So that's the next milestone, stage separation.
Wow, and Chris has still got it. Way to go,
and
Chris.
There is BECO, booster engine cutoff on the Atlas V first stage. And there is separation motor firing, a brief flash of the SEP motors. Standing by for RL-10 ignition on the Centaur upper stage. It is flying lower and lower in the sky here from Cape Canaveral. Not sure we're going to catch a glimpse of Centaur, but ULA does confirm a nominal ignition of the Centaur upper stage. Centaur, the star of the show for the rest of the flight, now on its way to inserting into its initial parking orbit. Again, the flight proceeding nominally so far. We're on to the Centaur upper stage. Back here at the press site, we are catching a glimpse of the Space Launch Complex 41, the water deluge system, which is now spraying down the pad to protect it from the acidic exhaust of those 5 solid rocket boosters. Not a very healthy thing for all that pad infrastructure. So we're going to get to a shot of that in a little bit, because we do, of course, need to show the empty launch pad, as is tradition. But we do also see very low in the sky, we're getting a glimpse of that RL-10 now. And also, a little bit higher in the sky, a little bit of backlit exhaust plume. I think that's what we're seeing, right, Chris?
I think that's just a weird low-hanging fog cloud near us that's being eliminated by our stuff.
All right.
I see what you mean, but yeah, it's not the jellyfish. Yeah.
It's all right. Had my hopes up for a second. But the RL-10 is getting ever so dim as it gets lower and lower in the sky. I think I'm about to lose it from my own eyes here. Of course, the burn itself is going very, very well.
Yes, it is.
How long is this burn?
That'd be a great question for someone with a mission timeline in front of them, but that's not me, so I don't know.
The initial burn should place the vehicle into... the initial burn of a Centaur is usually about 12-ish minutes in length. I'm looking up the exact time right now. It's a 6-minute burn to reach its initial parking orbit, so not as much today. So all in all, about a 10.5-minute ascent to its initial parking orbit for today.
Very cool. What are the little motors like I'm seeing? Is that like a reaction control kind of thing that we're seeing on this animation from ULA?
Yep, those are the RCS thrusters, Jack.
Neat.
Okay. I mean, no.
All right, the STP-3 friendly satellite. I don't know, the two satellites. I want to call them friends. The two satellites that are part of the STP-3 mission are proceeding into orbit. Go Centaur, go.
Yeah, you can still see that perigee altitude very, very negative there in the live data that's coming down from the vehicle. So you'll see that perigee go positive there along with the apogee, which is already positive.
Oh yeah, good shout. And you can see it's very slowly ticking up, starting to accelerate. Here's a question. Oh gosh, where'd it go? Oh, here we go. Tim is asking, are the SRBs recovered? I know they did that for the shuttle because they were actually reused, but +1 for the shuttle reference. But in this case, would they maybe recover them for like data analysis purposes, or is that just not a thing because they sort of impact the ocean and go Kersplitters?
Yeah, the Atlas V SRBs do not come down with parachutes or anything. There's no recovery whatsoever. Purely expendable on the Atlas V configuration.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, every once in a while, like with the Ariane 5 rocket, they'll recover the solid rocket boosters just to do an inspection, but especially with the single non-segmented ones that the Atlas uses, there's really not a reason to recover them.
Makes sense. I just had to ask that question because of the ability to unlock a shuttle reference.
Yeah, we haven't had. I don't think we had a shuttle reference prior to. Oh no, that's not true. We talked shuttle earlier. There was a healthy amount of shuttle.
There's never enough though. If it's a NASA spaceflight stream, we need more shuttle. That's like more cowbell. We need more shuttle.
Indeed, but you can see continuing here almost to the end of this 6-minute burn for the Centaur, which will put her into the initial parking orbit. You can see that negative perigee down to just negative 750 or something now. So just waiting for that to get positive here in the final seconds of the Centaur burn to get into the initial parking orbit. And you can see that inclination also lowering down. This is part of Atlas's RAN, or right ascension, of the ascending node steering ability to alter the inclination just a little bit as it's ascending into orbit.
Yep, that perigee is almost positive,
Almost.
which is good because rockets and payloads impacting with the ground is very bad. Just ask Zuma.
Exactly.
Or maybe don't. Tinfoil hat time again. And positive perigee. Yay.
Positive perigee, and now we're actually above 85, so we're above the we're above the atmosphere. So that is good. We are orbital, standing by for that cutoff. And we see the cutoff has occurred. So Centaur is in a 154 by 209 kilometer orbit. That is a good parking orbit for the initial round of what they will need. So with that, congratulations to ULA for a successful first part of a 7.5-hour launch campaign to get the STP-3 payloads into their desired orbit. And with that, we are going to break down our camera rig here at the Cape and get back in our vehicles so we can caravan out after this successful launch. So Thomas and I will turn it back to you, Jack, in the studio, and you and Michael. And thank you so much for joining us and for being here with us today. It's a nice, happy, empty launch pad as we wrap things up here.
Very cool. Thank you to you and Thomas for being out there in the field, and Julia and Steven. Looking forward to Steven's photos. That's going to be a treat. And Julia's and Thomas's. So much content coming, so keep your eyes open for all of that. But I will let you guys break down.
Yep, signing off from here at the press site. Thanks everybody for watching.
Y'all have a good morning.
Very cool. So STP-3 is now in a parking orbit. What a great launch from Slick 41. Chris and Thomas and Julia are going to be packing up, but if you want their info, let's go through it really quick. We had Chris Gebhardt, Assistant Managing Editor of NASASpaceflight. Pop up his info there. Oh, hang on a second. It'll pop up in a second. There we go. And there's his Twitter handle. And we also had in the field Julia Bergeron. Nice, and cool view from Fleet Cam is appropriate for Julia because she is the Fleet Chaser Extraordinaire, along with Pauline. Thank you for being out there, Julia. And we had also Thomas on stream. And there's his Twitter handle. And of course, in the back we had Michael. Oh, we had me. I'm really bad at this tonight. It's me. It's Jack Byer, video editor, photographer, live stream host, all the things. Thank you for listening to me fail at hosting. And in the background we had Michael Baylor. There we go. Thanks, Michael, for pushing the buttons and pulling the levers and helping us with the call-outs in the back channel and everything that you do. But with that, we will leave y'all. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. Maybe go over to Fleet Cam and hang out, or go over to Starbase Live and hang out, or if you're a Discord Capcom member, hop into the Discord and say hey. But with that, we will leave you until next time, till the next launch anyways. Have a good night.
Propulsion continues to be normal.
RCP chamber pressure looks good. Toggling up. Roger, roll, Atlantic.
Water towers can fly! Yes!
Tango Delta nominal.
Flight down, STP off. Say again, STP off.
Yikes. You bet. Concur. We don't need any more of these.